formal report to the president's office that had to do with, every area, curriculum, students, staff, faculty, equal opportunity policy. There was no sexual orientation. By the way, that term I had problems with also, but that's okay.
Yeah.
We can talk about that if you ever want to. But sexual orientation was not in the it was in the anti-harassment policy. You couldn't be harassed, you could be fired. However, there was no legal protection. So that was one of our major recommendations. And I think politically that became our next step at Grand Valley, was to get sexual orientation into the policy. That took several years. I believe Grand Valley was one of the final public universities in the state to include that in the employment policy. And then from that, once that was done, I believe the next became domestic partner benefits. I can't think of anything major in between there. And I and about 3 other women, and there were many, many people involved, but we decided that what we would do, there were faculty, 3 or 4 faculty, what we would do is go directly to board members. We had many conversations with the president's office, but of course ultimately it's the board. So we arranged separate meetings of the 3 of us with an individual board member.
Mm-hmm.
It was probably one of the most rewarding experiences that I've ever had at Grand Valley. Extremely receptive, the board was, or at least the board members, and we probably talked to about 5. And of course, their concern was how is this going to affect donations?
Mm-hmm.
How is this going to affect the donor board? So, of course, we talked about that, and there was no solution. There was no way we could predict how it was going to affect the donor board. But little by little, it became apparent to us, and I think to administration, that the board was not 100% against it. And to shorten a story with many, many parts, you probably know that finally the president's office decided that they would introduce a domestic partner, and that the board would probably approve it. And for one reason or another, I think it got exposed to the media. I've heard many versions of how that happened. Exposed to the media, and it was written about in the press. The timing was awkward. Apparently, there were members of the donors community that really were against it. And so the decision was retracted. And that was a real blow to, not just to those of us who had been pursuing it on an individual board member level, but also I think to the administration. I think they were very sincere. And of course to the gay and lesbian faculty and staff, a real blow. And that was it. For quite a few years.
Yeah.
We went through another president, and then another president, and then by then it was not such a hot topic. I mean, it was supported in many ways. But it wasn't an inflammatory topic. And most universities, corporations, by then, it was not uncommon. And so President Haas very openly pursued it, and there's a bit of flack, perhaps more than I know, but it's there, and it's wonderful.
Cindy, could you just say, just to kind of, so we have a kind of a timeline of this, could you sort of say when the first effort to get domestic partner benefits, what year that was, and when it was when it was sort of defeated because of it being exposed, and sort of try to use that language when you say that, and then when it was finally passed under Haas, and what year that you think that would have been?
I wish I knew. I almost made a note to look this stuff up. I'm going to say in the mid-90s is when the efforts to get it really, really coalesced. And perhaps it was the late 90s decision was made, but unfortunately withdrawn. Could have been the early 2000s. And then President Haas, I'm going to estimate, '08.
You know, besides domestic partner benefits, that sort of struggle on campus, I mean, what changes have you seen since coming to work there in the late 80s to now, in terms of both changes that has impacted faculty, staff, and students?
Well, as far as faculty and staff, the biggest impact has been the ability to be open, just totally. It's not even a topic of conversation anymore. The second big thing for faculty and staff was how supported we were by the Academic Senate, which represents the entire faculty. Also by staff associations. Everybody was backing the quest for domestic partner benefits. For students, I would say the biggest change is the existence of the LGBT Resource Center. That was a long time coming. We joke for about 3 years. That was one of the recommendations of that early advisory committee to the president, was that there be a center. And for a long time, the center was 2 bookshelves over in the student union and an email or a phone number to call. But the existence of the formal LGBT Resource Center is a sea change. It really is. First of all, the director has, the former director and the current director have been just gangbusters. And you have to hand it to the administration.
Mm-hmm.
It looks to me that there's pretty much carte blanche to do things that are appropriate for a university setting. There's a lot of heated discussions, a lot of controversial people, controversial films. Just a real good job that has been done there. So I would say that's the biggest for students. And because it's so big and publicized, everybody benefits.
I recently finished a book by a scholar named Vicki Eckler. It's called Queer America, which is sort of a people's history of the LGBT community in the United States. And sort of fits into kind of our attempts to do what we're trying to do at the local level here. One thing that she mentions that's been sort of an ongoing sort of tension within the LGBT community, particularly since the 60s, particularly and definitely came to sort of a head with, you know, things like Stonewall and other kinds of actions like that. It's sort of been this sort of tension between folks who are more interested in just trying to kind of assimilate into sort of the dominant culture, and folks who are saying, no, this is more about liberation for us. It's not just about having the right to marry, you know, it's much bigger than that, because many folks would say we question the institution of marriage itself, kind of thing. So I'm just sort of wondering, in terms of maybe, again, your own personal experience, or just, you know, maybe even also Grand Rapids, how Grand Rapids sort of fits into that kind of national dynamic that certainly exists.
Well, the turmoil that you described is certainly internalized in my own self. I guess I believe, and I think the women's community that I know, I'm talking again about kind of a second, where we're older, the second wave feminist women's community, would say it may be about assimilation, it may be about liberation, but the women's community, the lesbian community, would say neither. I think they would say it's about doing it differently. And to explain that is hard, because there's a desire not to model ourselves the heterosexual community, if there is such a thing as that.
Right, right.
But to do relationships differently. To question not just same-sex marriage and whether gay people deserve it or should have the right, but to question why any relationship, gay or straight, should be privileged by getting tax breaks.
Mhm.
What, what is it about being in a romantic relationship or a partnered relationship that should give you tax breaks anyway?
Right.
Why shouldn't a single individual have, well, you get my point. Why
Mhm.
should any relationship be privileged by the government? So I think, I would like to think that there's a tendency and a desire to take it even further, to even question some of these things that we're fighting for
Mhm.
and saying we deserve, and it's only fair to almost flip it on its side and say, whoa, let's look at the whole thing.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember when the LGBT Resource Center brought Susan Farr to town.
Yes, yes.
And spoke about, the model of relational organizing, but she also made the point that in doing organizing, and this is some time ago, maybe 20 years ago, and even still ongoing with a lot of folks, particularly in the South, a lot of folks in the LGBT community were much less interested in marriage equality and were much more interested in economic issues.
Oh,
That
yes,
was of
that-
greater concern to them.
Mhm. Well, and again, I think that probably is the main cause for any kind of separation between the gay male community and the lesbian community is economic issues. I would repeat that it's a matter for women more of women's issues, which are economic issues,
Mhm.
rather than liberation issues.
Okay. Well, maybe just as one final point here is that, uh, 10, 20, 30 years from now, we're hoping that, people will still use this material in a sense, right? This archive of information from people. And so I'm just wondering if thinking that far out, if there are young people, whether it's in high school or university settings, who might be looking at this material and thinking about, what people have done before them to kind of get them to where they are now. And who knows where we're going to be 30 years down the road around these issues. But is there, I guess two things. One thing would, what would you, if you had any kind of a message for people who might be seeing something like this down the road, what might you say to them about, particularly for young people who are kind of, exploring their own identities? Like, what does it mean to be human and to deal with, their identity in the world? And then secondly, maybe something about the importance, if you think there is any importance of people understanding this history, that what people have done before them, that kind of has, provided some foundation for them to do and be who they are now.
Well, certainly, all of the forerunners of anything hope that those who follow don't forget them and don't start taking that for granted. Certainly, the women's movement has struggled with that. But for gay and lesbian people, I would hope not just that they remember it, but that they don't try to assimilate too much. That's the point of this, is that assimilation is not ipso facto the way to go. The point is that difference is the goal. And I don't just mean accepting difference, because that's such a namby-pamby
Mm-hmm.
kind of approach, but to really keep that difference going.
Mm.
How would I operationalize that? I'm not talking about wearing lavender and that kind of thing, but just to examine, can we do things differently?
Mm-hmm.
And can that carry out over into any society? I mean, obviously, the gay lesbian community doesn't have all the answers,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a desire to do things differently,
Mm-hmm.
and to not assimilate, and to not make it all about rights and justice, but to also do it at that level that, again, I'm going to say that women tend to do it. It's more the private sphere. It's not government. It's not politics. It's not the public square.
It's relational.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, relational.
Okay. Well, great.
It's kind of interesting when I talk to my students a lot. I happen to teach a course in social foundations of education, which is wide open, and it's a history, of course, of how schooling is influenced by politics and perspectives and ideologies. And certainly we do a lot with race, class, gender, and I am pretty open in my classroom, not at the beginning, but later on as we get into things about my personal relationship. And it's fascinating. It's just fascinating, their reactions. I've never once received a bad reaction. I've never once received anything, a snarky comment on an evaluation. And I can't say that they're very well informed before we start talking about these issues, not just about myself, but from a historical point of view, but very, very open to just knowing
Mm-hmm.